The fluorescent lights of Dr. Albright's office hummed, a sterile counterpoint to the storm brewing outside and, more acutely, inside me. I'd been told to get on all fours, a position that felt less medical and more vulnerable exposed. My back ached, a persistent, dull throb that had been my constant companion for weeks, a physical manifestation of the stress that had been slowly crushing me. Dr. Albright, a woman whose reputation for thoroughness preceded her, had a voice like smooth river stones, calm and unyielding. She moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years spent navigating the intricacies of the human body, both its frailties and its resilience. Her presence, even in a clinical setting, was oddly comforting, a steady anchor in my swirling anxiety. I shifted, the paper crinkling beneath my knees, and focused on the framed anatomical diagrams on the wall, intricate maps of muscles and nerves that suddenly felt far too intimate. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and something else, something subtly floral that must have clung to Dr. Albright's scrubs. She knelt beside me, her breath warm against my ear as she explained the procedure, her words a soothing rhythm against the frantic beating of my heart. Her fingers, strong and calloused, probed the knotted muscles along my spine, each touch sending a jolt of sensation through me, a mixture of pain and a strange, unexpected relief. It was a professional touch, of course, entirely clinical, yet there was an undeniable current beneath it, a focused intensity that made me acutely aware of her proximity, of the small, enclosed space we shared. "Relax into it," she murmured, her voice a low thrum against the hum of the lights. "Let your body tell me what it needs." Her words, simple as they were, resonated with a deeper meaning, a quiet invitation to surrender, not just to the physical examination, but to something more profound. I closed my eyes, the world narrowing to the pressure of her hands, the scent of her, the rhythm of her breathing. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the window pane, mirroring the tempest within me. I was a mess, professionally adrift, personally shipwrecked, and here, in this sterile room, a stranger was touching me with a tenderness I hadn't realized I was starving for. It was a strange, unsettling paradox, this clinical intimacy, and I found myself leaning into it, drawn by a magnetic pull I couldn't, or perhaps didn't want to, resist. The first time I really saw her, truly saw her, it wasn't in the sterile confines of her office. It was weeks later, after my initial course of treatment, when I'd bumped into her at the local farmer's market. She was standing by a stall overflowing with vibrant heirloom tomatoes, her dark hair pulled back in a loose braid, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She wore a faded denim jacket over a simple white t-shirt, a stark contrast to the crisp scrubs I was accustomed to seeing her in. The transformation was striking. Without the barrier of her professional attire, she seemed softer, more approachable. Her eyes, usually so serious and focused, now held a spark of amusement as she haggled good-naturedly with the vendor. I almost didn't recognize her, and for a moment I hesitated, unsure if I should approach. But then she looked up, her gaze meeting mine across the bustling market square, and a slow smile spread across her face, a genuine, unreserved smile that reached her eyes. "Miss Hayes," she said, her voice still that smooth river stone, but now laced with a warmth I hadn't heard before. "Fancy meeting you here." I felt a blush creep up my neck, a ridiculous reaction, I knew, but her smile had disarmed me, stripped away the layers of professional distance that had previously existed between us. We talked for a few minutes, about the weather, about the quality of the produce, about nothing and everything. It was a mundane conversation, yet it felt charged with an unspoken energy, a subtle hum beneath the surface. As we parted ways, she offered me a small, ripe plum from her basket. "For your journey," she said, her fingers brushing mine as I took it. The contact was fleeting, barely there, but it sent a shiver through me, a quiet tremor that resonated long after she'd disappeared into the crowd. I stood there, the plum warm in my palm, its skin a deep, bruised purple, and realized with a jolt that I was looking forward to my next appointment, not just for the relief it offered my aching back, but for the chance to see her again, to perhaps catch another glimpse of that unguarded smile. The line between patient and doctor, once so clearly defined, had begun to blur, softened by the unexpected intimacy of a shared moment at a farmer's market. My appointments became less about the pain and more about the anticipation. Each session was a delicate dance, a slow unveiling of layers. We'd talk, at first about my progress, then about my work, my life, the small anxieties that pricked at the edges of my days. Dr. Albright listened with an intensity that made me feel seen, truly heard, in a way I hadn't been in years. Her questions were insightful, probing, not just at the physical symptoms, but at the emotional roots of my discomfort. She had a way of looking at me, her dark eyes steady and unblinking, that felt like a quiet invitation, a silent challenge to be honest, not just with her, but with myself. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling session, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within me, I confessed my fears about my failing business, the creeping sense of inadequacy that had taken root in my soul. The words tumbled out, raw and unedited, a torrent of vulnerability I hadn't intended to unleash. I expected a professional response, a gentle redirection back to my physical symptoms, but instead, she just listened, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a silent anchor in my confession. When I finally ran out of words, the silence in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of my admissions. Then she spoke, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "We all have moments where we feel like we're drowning, Ms. Hayes. The trick is to remember you know how to swim." Her words were simple, yet they resonated deeply, a lifeline thrown to me in my despair. She didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions, but rather a quiet acknowledgement of my struggle, a gentle reminder of my own strength. In that moment, the doctor-patient dynamic shifted again, subtly but irrevocably. She wasn't just treating my back, she was tending to my soul, stitching together the frayed edges of my self-worth. It was a profound act of care, one that transcended the boundaries of her profession, and it left me with a feeling of warmth, a quiet hope I hadn't felt in a very long time. The touch, initially purely clinical, began to change, imperceptibly at first, then with a growing intensity that made the air crackle between us. Her fingers, strong and knowing, would linger a fraction of a second longer on my skin, a subtle caress that spoke volumes. Sometimes, during a particularly deep massage, her thumb would brush against the sensitive skin of my inner arm, sending a jolt through me that had nothing to do with muscle release. I found myself holding my breath, acutely aware of every subtle shift in her proximity, every whisper of her breath against my ear. It was a silent language, a secret conversation unfolding beneath the guise of therapy, and I was a willing participant, my body responding to her touch with an eagerness that both thrilled and terrified me. I started noticing the small details, the way her hair curled just behind her ear, the faint scent of cedar and something floral that clung to her, the gentle slope of her shoulders beneath her scrubs. My gaze would linger on her hands, those capable, knowing hands that brought me both pain and relief, and I'd imagine them doing other things, touching me in different ways, in different contexts. The thoughts were scandalous, inappropriate, yet they persisted, a relentless hum beneath the surface of my consciousness. I'd catch myself staring, then quickly avert my eyes, my cheeks flushing, hoping she hadn't noticed my blatant indiscretion. One day, as she was helping me sit up after a session, her hand rested on the small of my back, a steadying presence. Her thumb, almost imperceptibly, traced a slow, deliberate circle on my skin, just above the waistband of my pants. It was a touch so light, so fleeting, that it could have been accidental, a mere byproduct of her professional duty. But I felt it, every nerve ending in my body screaming awake, and I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones, that it was not. Her eyes, when they met mine, held a flicker of something raw, something hungry, a mirror of the desire that was now a constant companion in my own heart. The unspoken hung heavy in the air, a palpable tension that throbbed between us, a silent acknowledgement of the dangerous, thrilling path we were both unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, embarking upon. The next few appointments were charged with this silent, electric tension. We spoke less, our words becoming more clipped, more careful, as if we were both afraid to break the fragile spell that had settled between us. The touch became bolder, more deliberate. Her fingers would intertwine with mine as she guided my stretches, her palm pressing against mine for a moment longer than necessary. Her gaze would linger, searching mine, and I would find myself lost in the depths of her dark eyes, caught in a silent dialogue that bypassed words entirely. My heart would pound in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, and I'd struggle to maintain my composure, to keep my breath even, to pretend that her proximity wasn't unraveling me, thread by delicate thread. One rainy afternoon, the kind of day that felt ripe for confession, she was demonstrating a new exercise, her body close to mine, her arm brushing against my side. The air in the room was thick with the scent of rain and her perfume, and I felt a dizzying pull towards her, an almost unbearable urge to lean into her, to close the small gap between us. As she adjusted my posture, her fingers brushed against the sensitive skin of my neck, and I gasped, a small, involuntary sound that escaped my lips. Her hand froze, her touch suddenly still, and she looked at me, her eyes wide, a question unspoken in their depths. "Miss Hayes," she began, her voice a little rough, "are you all right?" But her gaze wasn't on my back, it was on my eyes, on my mouth, on the tremor that ran through my body. I couldn't speak, couldn't form a coherent word. All I could do was stare back, my own desire laid bare, raw and vulnerable. The air thickened, the unspoken words hanging heavy between us, a tangible thing. In that moment, the professional facade crumbled entirely, revealing the raw, undeniable attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. We were no longer doctor and patient. We were two women, caught in a dangerous, exhilarating dance, teetering on the precipice of something profound and irrevocably life-altering. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, like a violin string pulled to its breaking point. Her hand, still on my neck, felt like a brand, searing into my skin. The rain outside had intensified, a drumming against the window that mirrored the frantic beat of my heart. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the warring emotions, professionalism battling with something deeper, something primal. Her breath hitched, a small, almost imperceptible sound, and then, slowly, deliberately, her thumb began to stroke the sensitive skin behind my ear. It was a tentative touch, a question rather than a statement, and it sent a shiver of pure sensation through me, a molten heat that spread through my veins. My eyes fluttered closed, a silent surrender. I leaned into her touch, my head tilting slightly, inviting more. The small space between us felt charged, humming with an almost unbearable tension. I could feel the warmth of her body, the subtle scent of her, and I wanted, with a fierce, aching desperation, to close the distance, to bridge the chasm that separated us. When I opened my eyes again, her face was closer, her gaze locked onto mine, a silent plea in their depths. "Miss Hayes," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain, I think we need to talk," but her eyes weren't talking. They were asking, begging, for something else entirely. I shook my head, my throat tight with emotion. "No," I managed to croak, the word a raw, desperate whisper. "Don't talk." My hand, as if with a will of its own, reached up, her fingers intertwining with hers, pulling her closer. It was a reckless, impulsive act, a complete abandonment of all professional boundaries, of all the unspoken rules that had governed our interactions. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the undeniable pull, the magnetic force that had been drawing us together, slowly but inevitably, since that first examination. Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then something else, something akin to relief, washed over her face. And then, slowly, tentatively, she leaned in, her breath warm against my lips, and the world dissolved into a soft, aching kiss. The kiss was tentative at first, a hesitant exploration, a question asked and answered in the soft press of lips. It tasted of rain and something subtly floral, a blend that was uniquely her. Then, as if a dam had burst, it deepened, a hungry, urgent claiming. Her hand moved from my neck, tracing a path down my spine, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I responded with equal fervor, my hands tangling in her soft hair, holding her to me as if my life depended on it. It was a kiss that spoke of weeks of unspoken longing, of hidden desires, of a quiet ache that had finally found its release. When we finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, the silence in the room was profound, broken only by the steady drumming of the rain. Her eyes, usually so composed, were now wide and dark, reflecting a mixture of shock and exhilaration. A faint blush colored her cheeks, and her lips, swollen and red from our kiss, were parted slightly. "Miss Hayes," she whispered again, her voice husky wet. "What was that?" But the question was rhetorical, a mere formality. We both knew exactly what it was. It was the culmination of weeks of simmering tension, of unspoken glances, of forbidden touches. It was the moment when the professional boundaries had not just blurred, but shattered entirely, leaving in their wake a raw, undeniable connection. I couldn't speak, could only stare at her, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Her gaze was intense, searching, and in its depths I saw a reflection of my own desire, my own fear, my own burgeoning hope. The air crackled with a new kind of electricity, no longer just tension, but something richer, more profound, possibility. The storm outside raged on, but inside, a new kind of calm had settled, a quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted, irrevocably. In that kiss, in that moment of reckless abandon, we had stepped across a line, and there was no turning back. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with complications, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something real, something worth fighting for, something that tasted like hope. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions, a kaleidoscope of exhilarating highs and terrifying lows. We knew we couldn't continue our doctor-patient relationship, not after that kiss. The ethical lines were too deeply etched, the professional repercussions too severe. But neither of us could simply walk away. The connection was too potent, too undeniable. We met in secret, stolen moments in quiet cafes, late-night drives to secluded overlooks, our conversations a mix of hesitant confessions and nervous laughter. Each touch, each glance, each shared smile felt like a precious, illicit treasure. She was different outside the clinical setting, more relaxed, more open. I learned about her love for old jazz records, her passion for cooking elaborate meals, her quiet dedication to her ailing mother. And she, in turn, listened to my stories, my fears, my dreams, her dark eyes reflecting an empathy that went beyond mere understanding. We spoke of the risks, the potential fallout, the impossibility of our situation, yet each conversation only served to draw us closer, to solidify the fragile bond that was forming between us. There was a quiet desperation in our clandestine meetings, a sense of urgency, as if we knew our time was limited, that the bubble we had created could burst at any moment. One evening, as we sat in her car overlooking the city lights, the rain a soft patter against the windshield, she turned to me, her hand reaching for mine. Her fingers intertwined with mine, a familiar comfort. "I can't lose my license, Miss Hayes," she said, her voice soft but firm. "My career, my family. It's all I have," I nodded, my throat tight. I understood. I truly did. But the thought of losing her, of severing this nascent connection, felt like a physical pain in my chest. "Then what do we do?" I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. She squeezed my hand, her gaze steady, unwavering. "We figure it out," she said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. Together, and in that moment, despite the overwhelming odds, despite the fear and the uncertainty, I felt a surge of hope, a fragile, defiant belief that maybe, just maybe, we could navigate this impossible path, hand in hand. The decision was agonizing, fraught with fear and guilt, but it was also liberating. I found a new doctor, a kind, efficient woman who specialized in sports injuries. The transition was awkward, painful even, a severing of a tie that had become far more than professional. But it was a necessary step, a clear demarcation that allowed our burgeoning relationship to breathe, to exist in the open, even if only to ourselves. Our dates moved from clandestine meetings to more public, yet still discreet, outings. We explored art galleries, cooked elaborate dinners in her cozy apartment, spent weekends hiking in the nearby mountains. Each shared experience deepened our connection, weaving our lives together, thread by delicate thread. There were still whispers, of course. The small-town grapevine was relentless, and the sight of us together, two women, one a respected doctor, the other a struggling business owner, raised eyebrows and sparked speculation. But we learned to navigate it, to deflect the curious glances, to ignore the hushed conversations. Our bubble, once so fragile, began to solidify, strengthened by our shared commitment, our quiet defiance. I learned to love her quiet strength, her unwavering integrity, her dry wit that could always make me laugh, even in the darkest moments. And she, in turn, found solace in my impulsiveness, my passion, my unwavering belief in her, even when she doubted herself. The path wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of the crushing weight of societal expectations. But each time, we found our way back to each other, to the quiet understanding that had first sparked in that sterile doctor's office, under the hum of fluorescent lights. Our love story was unconventional, born from a place of vulnerability and forbidden desire, but it was ours, unique and fiercely protected. And as I lay beside her one night, her head resting on my shoulder, the scent of her skin a comforting presence, I knew, with an unwavering certainty, that getting on all fours at the doctor's office had been the beginning of everything. It had been the moment my world had tilted on its axis, the moment I had found not just healing for my body, but a love that healed my soul.